Can you hear me now? Ah, great, okay. So, uh, so hello everybody, and I bring you greetings from Pakistan. So sorry to come between your coffee and this, but such a privilege for me to be invited to this gathering of experts from so many diverse fields with a format designed to foster stimulating discussions about our common future. Thank you, Sabine, Marie-Therese, and Wojtek for giving me the opportunity to participate in this timely discourse when both the global north and the global south have to rethink issues in the light of challenges that have emerged in this century particularly. So the first slide, let me see if I can manage it. Yeah, okay. So uh, after 3 days of wonderful presentations while enjoying the remarkable scenic beauty of Hallstatt, I present to you a divergent reality, very different, somewhat aloof from your own world. My country, Pakistan, with 220 million people, while Austria's 9 million, is the seventh most vulnerable country facing recurring disasters due to global warming. But as we know, Pakistan is not alone in this adversity. Today, we live in an era that is beset with fragmentation and disruptions. I've got a whole list of things if you'd like to just go through that. We have short of time, I'll try to wrap up more quickly. So, yeah, all right. So, a low, oh, I speak lower or slower? Okay, okay. All right, okay, I will do that, okay? So I've got it all written up as well, so if you'd like to, if I go so fast, so kindly just go through it. But I'm under strict instructions by our friend Sabine that I should wrap up as quickly as possible. Shorten it, so. So we see that all these disparities are on the rise even as we see continued violence in Gaza. I mean, there are so many displaced people just everywhere. So among the reasons of failure in reaching sustainable development goals, especially in my country, for the marginalized, and for really sections and impoverished people around the world, because they remain unserved or underserved. And those of us with design ability, so many of us sitting there, architects, urban planners, engineers, and so many others, for various reasons are not able to provide design services to improve the quality of life for disadvantaged communities. So should we not begin to consider those who seek design interventions for the creation of humanized developments and rights-based solutions? Because basic rights are rights for everybody. Because make no mistake, design is a powerful tool for fulfilling the unmet needs of a vast majority of people who inhabit this planet. They are never given what they really need. So today, we are confronted with a new world order. I decided to reset my priorities. Sorry, I think I better go back because this is too early, this one. So that suffers from climate emergencies, food insecurity, and ecological tyranny, and to adopt a change direction in my architecture for pursuing socio-ecological activism. I know this word was not taken very lightly the other day, but I think it's important to say it again. I felt this is no longer the time to create architectural icons as if commissioned by the Medicis of Florence or unscrupulous robber barons of colonial powers and eco-indulgent merchant princes of industrial revolution, the extraction that went on at that time. And must we continue to bow to the present day's multinationals that promote high carbon lifestyles? Instead, should we not worry about the harm to the planet when we know that 40% of emissions and 60% of embodied energy worldwide are due to the way we construct today, made clear in the presentation by Keva Brayahi. So now we can go back to this one. It is ironic that even though belonging to the third world, only after I brought to a close my career spanning over 36 years, from 2005, recurring disasters in Pakistan forced my attention towards the vast marginalized sections of my own country. I did not know, I did not see it. As a practicing architect, barring a few projects, I had also indulged in an extravagant, egotistic journey which focused on serving the elite of my country, barring a couple of redeeming projects of social housing that I had designed. Even though there had been many visionary architects, Egyptian Hassan Fatihi in the 1930s, British John Turner, and your own Conrad Fry in the 1970s. For 3 decades, I sequestered myself in a world of privileges until I realized I was continuing or contributing to further growth of inequalities in society. I felt I should not be driven by humanistic codes and egalitarian ideology. Should I not be thinking about that? Just as doctors' Hippocratic oath leads them to serve humanity, surely the ethics of architecture must also require us to strive for common good and a just society. So, barefoot in Pakistan. It took the massive 2005 earthquake in Pakistan that led me to adopt ecologically and socially just methodologies for vast marginalized sections in my own country. I felt empathy with those who walked barefoot and had become my fellow travelers, actually. I understood that walking barefoot also has its rewards. It keeps you in the direct contact with Earth at all times and teaches you the judicious use of the planet's resources. You learn to use everything that's around you without hurting the planet. It was the interaction with poverty-stricken, vulnerable populations that forced me to dispense with my hugely inflated ego, as all architects do. I had one like no tomorrow, obligating me to swallow the bitter pill of humility by sitting at the threshold of the poor, exploring their age-old practices. So at this point, I thought I should show you my journey a little bit. So in my journey, heritage and traditions of my country have provided me with sustenance and helped me to incorporate many of the lessons of the past in my humanitarian and urban regeneration work. So you see on the left is the very diverse, the tangible heritage of my country. To save time, I will not read from the slide, but you can just have a look as to what it was. It's quite a few different ages, starting from the Bronze Age. And then the intangible heritage that you see in the middle, which has shaped the lives of our people, that is all pervading. Sufi traditions, spiritualism, folklore, folk traditions, oral history, and particularly diverse crafts, many still being practiced by rural women that have been passed on to them from generation to generation, from mother to mother. And then the vernacular heritage on the right, from where I've learned the use of sustainable materials, local sourcing, ease of handling, economy in use, and one that is based on age-old wisdoms. It's come through God knows how many centuries. So for me, the past is very much alive, and it has provided me with directions to devise innovative ways to deal with today's climate upheavals. My attempt is to fashion an equitable and more democratic world through a nexus of tradition and innovation, devising low-impact, low-tech solutions to help communities self-build climate-smart, sustainable structures that resonate with their own cultural norms, at the same time withstand climate emergency that we are confronted with all the time. So, how to begin healing the planet? In my journey towards humanist architecture, decarbonization of the environment has been the most important factor to inhibit carbon emissions, and carbon sequestration through the choice of sustainable materials to create an architecture that would mend the existing imbalances and stitch the highly damaged Earth's tapestry. Today, for me, architecture must act as an instrument of social change and community transformation, which would equalize imbalances and disparities that exist in our societies. To aim for net zero sustainable goal, at the same time aim for zero poverty, the Sustainable Development Goal #1. Because as Nelson Mandela says, and I quote, "Overcoming poverty is not charity, it is an act of justice." So on the right, you can see the sustainable materials that I use all the time, and I've used in my humanitarian architecture to achieve carbon neutral structures. And yesterday, you saw the effective and innovative use of such materials by both Anna and Tian. They really exhibited that very forcefully. In this slide, you can see the attributes of such materials. So the earth, a combination of unfired, clay-rich earth and straw, provides passive environmental control, buffers relative humidity, creates non-toxic, healthy internal environment. Its waste becomes a resource and it minimizes stress on heating or cooling systems. It's a miracle material with zero embodied energy and zero eco footprint. The low energy lime, which through the alchemy of fire transforms a lump of stone into an unparalleled force that has provided strength to Bronze Age Egyptian pyramids, the 1st century BC Roman aqueducts, and the impregnable 15th century Timurid forts. And once the common earth and lime are mixed together, water provides a strength that cannot be surpassed by any other material, and the least, I think, by Portland cement. The third material that environmentalists love, I mean, this is all for environmental people, is bamboo. That is the largest renewable resource, which due to its resilience and ease of use, is the mainstay of my non-engineered seismic and flood-resistant structures. Technically classified a grass, it yields a new crop every 2 or 3 years. So now, as an architect for the poorest of poor, as you know what I am, I need to create the most economical, affordable, and strong structures. That's all I do in my life. For the poor, basing my designs on low-impact, zero-carbon structures, as you see in these slides. So these are some of my climate-resilient earth masonry structures. On the left, you see a sun-dried masonry school with a bamboo roof, and you can see all the attributes are written there, but also the thatch provides ventilation. It's a wonderful material to use. And then you can see the middle one, zero-carbon, non-engineered construction, first prototype built after major 2010 floods. So it's got local sourcing, low-impact construction techniques, and these result in highly economical, affordable, and sustainable alternatives. 40,000 of one-room houses were built in 2014, becoming the largest zero-carbon footprint shelter program in the world at 1/4 the cost of normal conventional construction. So there's much value in doing that. And then there was the last one on the right, as my Pakistan Chula, the stove, world famous, got a gold award from World Habitat. This smokeless, self-built earthen stove is life-transforming, which in addition to creating a clean, healthy space, gives dignity and respect to women, which is so important, I think, in all our civilizations. Housewives embellish surfaces with their reservoir of creativity, expressing pride, confidence, and ownership, showing how architecture can provide agency to those who earlier had no voice. 800,000 of these have been built in the last year alone. So then I want to show you this particular slide, and let's see whether, oops, how do I make the video, the animation? Can somebody help me, please? Or if I go on, it'll happen? What you mean I click again? Yeah. Oh, yeah. Oh, great. Okay, so these slides show the simple bamboo structures for multiple uses. This construction technique has been drawn from the famous Deji construction in northern Pakistan. Our innovation is to replace the original wood with bamboo and to utilize modern concept of prefabrication. The strength of prefabricated structures has since been tested in thousands of such structures. The use of prefab panels and modular form provides multiple possibilities. You keep on adding more, of course, up to a certain extent, and you can change the roofs from sloping to domical and so on and so forth. So these forms and module form allows a combination of modern techniques with traditional materials, which facilitates varied configuration and change of roof, as you see, of different types. So. Now, I just wanted to show you, because people don't believe in bamboo, this is a rather large structure, a multi-purpose hall, and the largest one in Pakistan. And you can see that not only we can use it for trainings and others, but also host international conferences. And it is built by non-literate, semi-skilled artisans. Its openness providing air movement and cool interior without any mechanical arrangement. There's nothing there that we need, because air just flows in that. So. And let's see further. So next portion of my presentation is about flood 2022. There was these devastating floods in Pakistan, and it is really, I wanted to show you also that the mechanism I've adopted, that it can lead to actually attaining SD number 1, there's no poverty, and that's the whole thing as to how we can get there. So the deluge had brought havoc, and you can see 1/3 of the country was submerged, 33 million people were facing abject poverty, still are actually, to be truthful. For us, the emergency or urgency was to find ways to initiate the process of resilient rehabilitation of hundreds of thousands, if not millions of people. For me, the only way was through decarbonization and decolonization of humanitarian assistance. Those engaged in the humanitarian field must be aware that the international colonial charity model, operating through UN system of clusters or silos, has failed to provide a sustainable solution. So much money has been sent and God knows where it's gone. I believe it is largely because the model treats affected communities as victims deserving of handouts, which makes people into beggars and robs them of their self-esteem. So why are we doing this? Many years ago, I decided to do away with the charity approach. To this end, I've used my design and architectural skills to provide people access to affordable and climate-resilient structures to keep them safe. That's the most important thing. At the same time, to create a just society and well-being of humanity as well of the planet. So what are the challenges? I realized that there's a barefoot ecosystem of the poor majority of an estimated 100 million of Pakistan's population that lives below the poverty line. To escape the poverty trap, I decided to devise a stratagem called Baza, or barefoot social architecture, that is akin to social engineering, to transform mindsets from a cycle of dependency to a culture of pride and self-reliance. Working with the poor has allowed me to adopt a bottoms-down, bottoms-up approach to find ways to provide guidance for efficient use of resources that has resulted in human rights-based development, as well as fulfilling unmet needs of impoverished communities. Within a year, hundreds of thousands of families affected by flood 2022 in Pakistan are on their way to achieve resilient rehabilitation and aim for 11 of the 17 SDGs. So just to give you some visuals, on the left is an aerial view of flooded Pono village in September 2022. This is a pilot of holistic model villages consisting of 3,000 households to demonstrate how, by using the tenets of Baza and adopting humanistic humanitarianism that incorporates humanist values of empathy, solidarity, compassion, generosity, and benevolence. It is possible to rehabilitate displaced communities by providing, and here I had to provide initially, material costing $150 per family. This is done by treating the displaced as partners, not victims, who under guidance can contribute their own effort as well as use of natural and waste materials that are freely available in the area. So on the right, you see how Pono village looked in 2023. There's much more plantation now, there are forests, all kinds of things are happening. So, and they were the ones who were left destitute after, flood of 2022. So I've got this like a ladder. How do you get out of the poverty trap? So to achieve that, we have to tackle the issue of environmental stewardship, climate challenge, and helping them rise above adversity through their own effort, not looking for somebody else to come and do it for them. The ladder shows how from the lowest level of destitution, the climbing of 6 steps enables households to reach the top of the ladder, or SDG number 1, that is no poverty. The first step is to fulfill basic rights needs of shelter, sanitation, water supply, and solar energy, as well as clean food, providing dignified living and privacy, particularly for women. The second step ensures food security by learning to grow vegetables, rear chickens, and breed small fish in domestic wells. Environmental stewardship consists of community forests with indigenous trees and enhancing biodiversity. The fourth step is treating floodwaters as a friend rather than a foe by storing in trenches and ponds and aquifer wells, all leading to fertility in the villages. Once secure from disasters, they begin marketing their barefoot products to the vast number of extremely poor people around them. Thus, resilient humanistic rehabilitation prepares them to escape the poverty trap. And this has been done, but only for a very small number. So this is just wanted to show you this is the climate resilient bamboo house that is the basis of security for the entire family, particularly women. The log has proven resilience in thousands of those built in flood and earthquake areas. Its prefabricated bamboo structural members allow filling of any locally available materials. The structure of each house is erected in 2 hours and then finished with matting and lime mud plaster, finished with the roof thatch that is also placed by households themselves. The houses are then personalized, as you can see, using decorations by housewives. And just wanted to show some of the decorated bamboo houses, the same structure, but each one is now personalized and embellished by housewives exhibiting pride and identity. And then picture on the right shows development within 6 months. And self-building by households, climate-resilient bamboo prefab structures, local sourcing, local materials, local expertise, and regeneration of local economies, all that has happened through that. So following the principles of a resilient rehabilitation in order to repair the planet, at the same time heal humanity, the steps I took were to use only zero carbon structures, sequester carbon in the choice of materials as well as in the soil, use of low impact techniques without mechanical means, foster barefoot enterprises using local, natural, and waste materials. So on the right, you can see a variety of zero carbon structures that have been self-built by communities to withstand flooding. Now, so what do we have to do? Place faith in the poor as partners. That's something that's very important. These are pictures that show the activities taken up by communities themselves with rudimentary means, but able to utilize all available sources. 10 minutes, okay. He's a hard taskmaster, but you do know that I come from the agrarian East, and time has no value. So. Try my best. Okay.
What do you want to discuss with the keeper of time? How much more do you need? How much more do you want?
I try my best. Okay. I'll do that. So anyway, you can see that, and you can see the human resource, and you can read about it maybe. And then there's the community resources. There's the available waste of debris, of collapsed structures. There's the zero carbon construction, which is made up of available materials such as reed, straw, cow dung, and bamboo and earth. It's all around you. And then, now this is something, so this is a pilot, delivered self-sufficiency in a year. It still required a sponsorship of $150. So as some of you know by now, I believe in no money. To deliver my target of rehabilitation of 1 million households, I had to ensure my 4 zeros. Zero carbon, zero waste, zero charity, to lead to zero poverty. So that was the challenge. Now, out of the 3,000 families that have become self-sufficient, we trained 1,000 barefoot experts who form the backbone of achieving my target. For this purpose, maximizing the potential in poverty became essential by devising a mechanism for peer-to-peer knowledge transfer. The same kind of people are passing on guiding help to others, as well as skills by these barefoot experts that we have trained. So while charging a small fee for their services, they guide the process of climbing the ladder one step at a time for communities to escape poverty. Now, through this stratagem, by December 2025, that is next year, 1 million families, or over 8 million people, are expected to escape poverty. Today, 870,000 families are already halfway up the ladder, having achieved food security, environmental stewardship, flood mitigation measures, and fabricating barefoot products. They're already on their way, and by December, 1 million will have reached the same position. Now, with a savings program in place in the next year, majority will be able to build their own eco-toilets and low-cost, climate-resilient one-room houses, along with solar lighting and water pumps. Now, by charging a fee of €1/10 per family, many barefoot experts are on their way to becoming barefoot millionaires. So everybody is a winner with no charity, but by building capacities of non-literate, destitute families. So now I only have maybe 9 minutes or 8, so I'll go very quickly with my next segment. I thought I would show it to you because I think with the whole thing happening in the urban centers, we need to focus on those as well. So if you'll permit me, I will just very quickly go through my slides rather than talk too much about it. So in Karachi, what I'm doing is now I've started a program of one eco street at a time, not taking up the whole city, one eco street at a time, by converting once auto-centric streets into forested, inclusive walking streets that would compensate for the lack of common urban space in the city. Now here too, I'm driven by heritage and tradition. So, let me just go quickly. I forgot all about it. Oh, it's not going forward. I think they don't want me to go further. We don't know. He's the hard taskmaster. We don't know. So here is just a glimpse of the city of Lahore, and you can read all the different attributes that it does possess. Low-rise, medium-density development, and so on. And zero low-energy passive design. These are all the aspects that we need today. So such attributes can lead our cities towards climate resilience, enable us to help contain emissions to within specified limits. Now, traditional urbanism in my country and in Europe could become the basis for ecological ecological urbanism for a better quality of life for people. So if you look at Hallstatt, provides a prime example of organic morphology based on narrow streets, medium density, low-rise development, semi-public squares, and space for interaction. You have it all there. So why is it that we maybe take it up? And then very quickly, just to show you, this is what Karachi looks like. And we know that cities are in the forefront of climate change battlegrounds because of burgeoning populations, 65 to 70% greenhouse gas emissions, consumption of 75% of natural resources, and producing 50% of waste. So they mostly suffer from heat islands, urban heat islands, and urban flooding, bringing life to a standstill. So, and there's a consensus now that traditional urbanism leads to eco-urbanism, and because that gives precedence to well-being of human beings rather on cars and vehicles. So you can see what could be. I will just let you read it all, because that shows what all can be possible and how we should be adopting many different approaches for having a different way of life, really. So now, this is my, this is my street on the left in Karachi that we took up. Karachi has 23 million people, mostly living in slums. And you can see the state of most of my streets, which look exactly like this in the middle of the city. So this highly polluted street on the left, located in the historic core of Karachi, is also a depository of a large number of endangered historic structures that you see on the right. And it echoes the past splendor of the city, and these are vital components of its identity. So I designed the street as a heritage-centered, climate-smart urbanism, while the local media has dubbed it the zero carbon street. And you can read all the various elements, zero cement, zero steel, no motorized vehicles, no demolition of historic buildings, avoiding new construction, planting Miyawaki-style forests for carbon absorption, terracotta pavers for cool environment, use of sponge pavements to absorb rainwater, and aquifer wells for flood prevention, and introduction of biodiversity. And the next one, you can see on the left, a kind of a view of the street and all the various elements that make up for it, which has 12 heritage buildings, and then 120-meter-long walking street that accommodates 4 Miyawaki forests with 400 trees, and some having grown to 6 meters in 20 months. Because we don't waste any water, it's all being used. 300 square meters of terracotta permeable pavements, no concrete pavements, and 130 square meters of sponge surfaces, and 7 aquifer wells. So again, you can see on the right, you can see the major elements. They are permeable terracotta covers. You have some beautiful stone covers. I wish you would not use any concrete in the city. And then porous pavements help absorb rainwater. Aquifer wells help in replenishing the aquifer, leading to fertility of the forest. Dense Miyawaki forest for environmental cooling. Local species of plants help reduce water consumption and biodiversity. Now, very quickly, I'll run through the before and afters of my street. Okay, on the left is how it was, and the right is what it looks like today. And then this is what the heritage building, one of the major landmarks look like, and now, how does it look now? And then again, if you see, this street would be really flooded, and now today you see that, it is looking fairly, there's zero flooding there now. And really the transformation, you can see how things can happen. Now, since heritage conservation is carried out by owners themselves, adding character and identity to the street, attracting local and foreign tourists, with feelings of ownership and pride, the owners have begun to maintain forests and ensure garbage removal. So they are now taking charge of the street. The third eco street will be inaugurated next month. These streets are in highly congested areas, enabling low-income communities and slum dwellers, particularly women and children, to breathe fresh air, to have access to fruit forests and indulge in kitchen gardening. Small street libraries have been set up in my walking streets. So now, in conclusion, I know that the scenario I presented is vastly different from your own world. Now, interestingly, Royal Gold medalist Sir David Chipperfield, in his keynote while discussing the value of bioculture at Davos a couple of years ago, pointed out that earlier, and I quote, "European-centric profession has been the example for non-European architects. Now, Europeans are looking at the non-European world because they are tackling real problems," unquote. And which indicates that time has come to examine issues of sustainability and climate change from the lens of the global south. All of us working in the region, and you saw the remarkable architecture of Tintan and also of Anna, how we had to be innovative in using locally available resources. By decolonizing the international colonial humanitarianism and capitalism-driven methodologies, I've been able to foster humanist values, such as empathy and solidarity, fostering shared responsibility within communities, and discarding profit-driven systems has helped to mitigate socio-ecological injustices among the poor. In the light of climate change, the question is whether architects will consider abandoning the use of highly energy-consumptive cement and steel by creating hybrid structures. A combination of high-carbon skeletons with low-carbon infill and finishes, perhaps incorporating my favorite zero-carbon materials, lime, earth brick, or bamboo panel partitions, lime or bamboo panel false ceilings, terracotta for flooring and for external finishes, extensive use of lime mortars and lime plasters that would make cement, concrete, and even steel redundant. So I dream of a world where creative professionals begin to follow movements of Baukultur, as we heard, a building culture that emphasizes quality, sustainability, and social responsibility. Transition design for sustainable development and regenerative systems. Degrowth for prioritizing human and environmental well-being over economic growth. And circular economy for reducing waste and excessive consumption of materials, movements being promoted in the global north. And my own barefoot social architecture and humanistic humanitarianism devised for sustenance of the marginalized in the global south, all of us creating alternative design conceptions which will help to fashion sustainable and equitable lifestyles for humankind. So, this is a question to you. Do you not think that by joining hands together, we could meet the challenge of net zero sustainable goal by 2050? Thank you very much. Thank you very much. I was okay? Was I okay? Was I okay in time?
May I just add joining hands and joining bare feet?
Yes.
To be consequent.
Absolutely. And I like your signal to everybody to come back, which was so similar to my own instrument of dugdagi, that's actually used to make monkeys dance.
Thank you very much. How do we continue? Wir gehen jetzt in eine wohlverdiente Kaffeepause. Geben Sie mir bitte noch 30 Sekunden Aufmerksamkeit nach der Kaffeepause, damit Sie wissen, wie wir weitermachen und wann wir heute aufhören. Nach der Kaffeepause gibt es einen Vortrag von Kjetil Thorsen. Und als großen Abschluss, als Finale des heutigen Tages gehen wir in eine Diskussion. Hannes Meyer wird moderieren. Promptern, nicht promptern, we don't know. Eine Diskussion mit Jasmin Lari und mit Kjetil Thorsen, um die Zukunftsspekulationen, also um die Spekulationen für die Zukunft auszuhandeln. Eine Frage?
Ja, ich habe immer gehofft auf eine Diskussion über das, was die Lari gesagt hat.
Okay.
Das ist ein Thema, das wir bisher noch nicht berührt haben. Es geht hier um Globalisierung.
Dankeschön, dann fasse ich das kurz. Wunderbar, dann fasse ich das kurz zusammen. Der Auftrag an uns, der Auftrag an mich, der Auftrag an dich, Hannes, lautet dann eine Diskussion über die Arbeit von Jasmin Lari, über die Arbeit von Kjetil Thorsen und das zusammenzufassen und das Publikum mit einzubeziehen. Dann freue ich mich sehr auf eure Fragen. Angedacht und angepeilt ist dann Abschluss der Interventa gegen 13:30, 13:40, dann können Sie zeitlich planen. Schöne, frische Luft.